is Brandon Ellis, our resident triplet. How cool is that? How many people can say they're a triplet? Brandon Ellis can say he's a triplet. He's got a twin brother, sister, so he is a triplet. And they all go to SUNY Westbury. How cool is that? So Brandon's going to have Scott Honickman assist him in his science fiction segment tonight. So take it away, Brandon. Spider-Man, cool.
All right, so I'm sorry to disappoint I couldn't get my trips, but I do have one extra person. Actually, I have two people beside me, Howie and Scott, so it's natural for a triplet to be with two other people. It's how we're comfortable, it's how we live. But for right now, I have a treat for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I present our science fiction segment, Stargazer, where we gaze at the stars and we look at what's happening in the science fiction world. Now, today we're talking about something that I thought related to Halloween, because this is the Halloween episode, is it not?
It certainly is.
Now, for those listening onto the show and not actually viewing, I'm dressed as Spider-Man right now, but if I do a little strip tease, is it okay if I strip a little bit?
It's your segment. You got carte blanche.
Okay, so if I take the Spider-Man suit off, you're going to see a Walking Dead shirt. That's right, I'm a fan of Walking Dead, and today we are talking about it. And Scott, too, is also a Walking Dead fan.
I am, that's true.
Good. It's been a very popular show. It's been on since, I believe, 2009, 2010, and it's on its 9th season right now. So it's a pretty big deal. Now, in regards to Halloween, it's great for that horror-y goodness, for all that blood and gore. It's pretty much about a zombie outbreak. However, they don't say the zombies in the show, they say walkers. And it's about a group of people really surviving. Now, if you look at the horror aspect, it's interesting, and it could be just like any other zombie-type piece of media. But what I want to talk about today, which I find particularly interesting, is it raises the question, which a lot of other science fiction properties have done. What would happen in a sort of post-apocalyptic world if a good amount of the population was either wiped out or turned in some way? How would people survive without technology, without indoor plumbing, without electricity? Simple things like that we take for granted in society, and they had to live without that. So any perspectives here, Scott?
Well, you're right, the show does put a heavy emphasis on human interactions with those conditions. What I think personally would happen if that scenario were to play out, probably a lot of conflicts, a lot of violence, a lot of course, scavenging for resources is going to cause a lot of conflict and violence. Yes, Brandon?
Yeah, Scott, and going along with that, with the show, there is a lot of scavenging for resources and all that. Gas is a really big issue. They're on their 9th season now. They're actually just running out of gas, so I find that pretty funny. But an important thing that you mentioned before, Scott, is conflict. Conflict is a big part of our psychology. We as people, we always gravitate towards any sort of structure in society, and without structure, it's absolute anarchy. So we follow a group of protagonists for a majority of the show, and conflicts arise. But the interesting thing, around, I think, season 6 or 7, if I'm right, there's a character introduced called Negan, and he leads something called
Saviors.
The Saviors.
Yeah, so Negan is this very violent person who is promising his followers, known as the Saviors, protection in exchange for resources that they bring to him. He's essentially a king, if you want to put it that way. But with this introduction of Negan, it kind of mixed up the show in a lot of ways, because there was never a character like him, a character who had this ideology of it's all me, and you're going to be below me, but I'm going to make you feel like I'm protecting you.
Now, it's interesting you say the word king, because I would go, in fact, and say that he's more of a totalitarian dictator for the most part. I wouldn't say he's full-on Hitler, he's not full-on Stalin, but he is presenting supreme authority. And what a lot of people tend to learn with psychology, Scott, we're actually in the same psychology class, so we could talk about this. People really gravitate towards authority figures. There's a blind, comfortable acceptance towards it. So even though the things that Negan does to have people be a part of his crew, it's cruel, it's inhumane, and it's objectively wrong, because people demand authority and structure and that sort of comfort in their life, they'll actually go towards Negan and the Saviors. So it brings up a lot of moral questions with humanity in general. We as people, we are, for the most part, with the exception of psychopaths and sociopaths, we're pretty much good. But it's funny to think, with a few things missing in our life, with a few screws and bolts gone from our lives, how we can go from good to doing questionable things for the sake of structure's sake.
Yeah, and you know, there's no law in the world of The Walking Dead, and they say law separates us from pretty much being animals. So it's an all-out war, essentially, fighting for for basic bare essentials that everyone takes for granted every day of their lives. So, that's the concept that grips so many people towards the show. That's why so many people have been watching for so long. The fact that there are zombies in the show is kind of secondary. It's the conflict and the interactions between each other that everybody looks forward to in the show. That and the deaths, of course.
You make a very good point. It's called The Walking Dead, and you could think, oh, it's because the dead are walking, the zombies. While that's true, I think there's also another layer to it. The dead walking are actually the main cast, because there is a good chance they're actually going to die from this. And something interesting that they did bring up, I believe at the end of the first season, they found out that when a person dies naturally, if they're not even bitten by a walker or zombie, for those unacquainted, they will naturally become walkers themselves. In order to get rid of that, they have to get shot in the head, or their brain has to stop working for that not to take effect. But it's a scary thing in the show to realize they could become the thing they're trying to run against.
Yeah, I think it was the end of season 1. One of the characters told one of the main characters that every human being in the show carries that virus innately. And then at the end of the second season, the main character told the rest of the characters that was fact. And it completely changed, their perspectives. Having that knowledge made them a little more bitter towards each other and more, protective of themselves, because it was just such a hard thing for them to grasp. Yeah.
So without going into spoilers too much, looking at this most recent season, the savior threat is pretty much, for the most part, abolished. And it's just about sort of rebuilding and making a new life, joining together and actually building onto society. So where we would have been in maybe the 1700s with technology, maybe a little bit more advanced with the knowledge they already have from the 21st century, that's what they're continuing. They're starting to make windmills, and if I'm not mistaken, they're trying to make some irrigation systems. So they're starting from the ground up, and the main conflict actually comes from a sort of civil war scenario. It's all about human conflict. So I don't want to spoil too much. I want you to actually tune into The Walking Dead. It's on Netflix. You can Netflix and chill till. It's a lot of fun. I recommend it. And it's an overall good time.
The entire thing is on Netflix, like you said. I forget what I was going to say. But
It's worth watching.
It is very worth watching. You can watch in probably 3 days if you don't leave your bedroom.
All right. So Brandon Ellis, Scott Honickman, thank you so much for enlightening us on The Walking Dead. And for people out there, it's certainly piques their interest and educates people, and I think it's going to drive some people to curiosity to watch this show. So thank you guys.
Pleasure's all mine. And Scott as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Awesome.